and welcome to another Fresh Fiction Video Book Club. I'm Samantha T, and today's guest is Felicia Grossman, who is here promoting her latest book, Wake Me Most Wickedly. Thanks for joining us, Felicia. It's good to see you.
Thank you all so much for having me. Yeah, I
And
made
I
sure I
love
have
how
her.
you have the book right there ready. We have it on our background also. It is a fabulous cover.
Well, thank you. No, they did an amazing job. Both the cover models were incredible. The photographer, everybody had such a really fun time. And a really fun story about this, they did not have an apple when they on set, so they used an avocado and they edited it in. So that's really an avocado.
You got to love technology nowadays.
You do, you do.
Well, Felicia, before getting into this specific book, for some of our new readers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you first get started writing?
Sure. I live now in Cleveland. I'm originally from Wilmington, Delaware, and I always like stories and I always like history. Being from that part of the East Coast, I grew up with sort of a lot of history and got to go to like a lot of going to school, like a lot of older houses. I mean, we were by Winterthur, which is sort of a museum of American furniture and like really, really deep in older American history. And I always like to sort of imagine what I'd be doing or what I could be wearing at that time. And so I always sort of wrote stories, and I always was attracted to historical romance novels even when I was really little, because I remember at the library they would have them on a wire rack near the checkout, and I'm sure there was like guys on the cover too, but all I could look at were the dresses. I desperately wanted the dresses. So I think half of it is I write these books so I can write those dresses.
I have to admit, I mean, I was of the generation where all of our prom dresses were something out of some of the Regency and the big gowns and I personally love that. Now I look back and I cringe because they were not exactly the most stylish. But at the time I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is right out of some of the historical romances. I love this."
And you felt pretty and it was fun. And that's the important part of it.
Well, and that's the other thing always about the romances. We are looking for those happily ever afters. We're looking for the fun, those feel good elements. And I think that's something that you've really captured in this series. There's so much fun in it. I mean, we've got gender bending fairy tales essentially at it, all set in the late Regency. I mean, what was the inspiration behind this particular series?
Well, when I read the first book, I was sort of at like a career crossroads, and my friend Stacey Adler told me to write what she calls a fuzzy blanket book, like a book that's just really sort of like your joy story. And for me, that's Cinderella. So I knew I was going to do a Cinderella retelling because Cinderella symbolizes, which is Marry Me by Midnight, because it symbolizes so much about like hope and like goodness and kindness, triumphing and everything. But when I was set out to do it, when I was sort of building my Prince character, I sort of conceived of her as a woman, and that worked, I think, better for the sort of characters and community I was writing. And then so I had to build her a guy Cinderella, and I continued on that as the series went on. This book I actually wrote the initial draft like I think a couple of weeks after I wrote the draft of Midnight, because the hero in this one, Sal Weiss, is in Midnight, and I sort of fell in love with him. He originally had a different name, but I was like, no, no, he's getting a book, so he's going to be Snow White. So it went to Sal Weiss, because Weiss is white in German.
And I did not pick up on that initially when I first picked up the book. And it wasn't until later I realized, oh no, this is based on all the fairy tales, and I'm getting all of those details about, like you said, so Weiss, okay, Weiss is white. And then I think when he's first introduced in this book, he's got on the bright blue jacket, which is
Yeah,
like, oh, that's how I picture Snow White. Okay, okay, I'm seeing all this.
yeah, I was subtle and sometimes less subtle other times. Whenever I can like sneak something in, I try to sneak a little reference in there.
Well, with the fairy tales, there's so many different aspects and so many different fairy tales out there. What was your main inspiration for these? Was it the classic Disney fairy tales and the animation movies? Was it Grimm's fairy tales? Has it been some of the retellings that they're also taking different spins on it? Broadway, I mean, there's so many
There's a
different
mix.
versions.
Yeah, there is a mix. Cinderella, I looked at like so many versions of there's a lot of musical theater versions of Cinderella and this that inspired Cinderella one as well. This one, Snow White is told less. So we got a little bit of Disney, a little bit of Grimm, and then I watched the weird Snow White and the Huntsman movie. I was like, this does some interesting things. I'm not sure they all work here, but it does interesting things. I can play with that. But I think as long as I like kept a vision of sort of like the core part of the story, like, again, like Cinderella was hope. Snow White is all about jealousy. It's the jealousy book. And then if you get to say the next book, Beauty and the Beast, that's transformation. And then the fourth book in the series, which will be Sleeping Beauty, is about revenge. It's a revenge fairy tale.
Okay. There's there's lots that can be done with that.
Yes.
But there's also some other twists. And I mean, in this one, the especially the female main character is older. I mean, she's not a
Yeah.
young ingenue. She's up there in years. She's older than the male hero. Was that another intentional spin
It's
on the traditional story?
not so with her, I built her for him. So it's interesting. I already had him ready and I was like, who would be a good match for him? And based on what I knew about him from the last book, I thought somebody older. I thought somebody a little bit older that to go with the sort of energy that a sort of puppyish energy that he had would be a good fit. And I thought that he could be good for somebody like her.
Mhm. Well, one of the things I also want to dig into are, I mean, this is a book set in the Jewish community with Jewish lead characters. And there's a spin, I think, also on your take on these characters too, where just from the characteristics, where normally in a lot of novels and other portrayals, you see a lot of the men as being very pious. They are very well educated in the different Jewish teachings, and then also with your female characters, typically they're not always portrayed as desirable females, right? I mean, they sometimes are or pushed into more of a shrewish element, or else they're portrayed as very supportive of the men in the story. In each of these cases, I mean, the leads here also spin that and are kind of forging their own way. So was that another purposeful element to this story, or
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a really good sort of summary. And it's not like stuff written. This is the call coming from that. So like I always try to say, like the inner Jewish community patriarchy is a little bit different than some of the broader non-Jewish ones in that the way our rules work are um, men have like a lot of obligations. They're called time sensitive obligations. Like they have to pray a certain time amount of day, they have to study and things like that. And so because of that, the women's role was always you have to do everything else. And that kind of generally is I can imagine that's generally kind of hard. So, and to manage that sort of, and there was probably a lot of complaining going on. And the people who were writing the stories did not understand the complaint. Why would somebody who has to take care of the house, do all the work, and take care of me all the time be annoyed that I'm home late, or I spent all our money that I didn't earn and they were supposed to use for dinner on some like object, like, and things like that. And I think that's a part of it is a reflection of that, and part of it is because of who was sort of telling these stories. My sister is a Hebrew school teacher, and she likes to say that it doesn't matter where it's from, Yemen, Germany, Iraq, Italy, Russia. Every story is a wise, pious man, his shrewd wife, the prophet Elijah, and maybe a talking fish. And that's what your story is. And I think it crept sort of over into a pop culture sort of way, especially as sort of communities became more assimilated, and then men could also get status not only by studying, by having sort of outward careers that often, yeah, again, the women would support, but they would sort of push like it's so there's that sort of push. And so I wanted to make sure when I'm writing these that women got to be heroic and desirable and fuller characters than just the people making sure you were on time for all the things you had to do.
And we really try not to get political usually in these interviews, but considering everything that is going on in the world right now, the other and with all the protests and just everything, um I'm going that direction a little bit. I think it's so uplifting with this story is that it is fun, and it is really portraying these characters in a time period that we don't typically see a lot of stories about Jewish heroes and heroines and really the Jewish culture. So many of the books that we are usually seeing with are set around the Holocaust or immediately after the Holocaust. And they're just so dark, which of course makes sense, but it does tend to, I think, overshadow so many other time periods in history. So, what was it like for you in writing and bringing this culture to life in an area that probably most people are not familiar with, or they don't really think about the struggles of the Jewish people in Regency England? Because it wasn't an easy time. I mean, they still didn't have a lot of rights.
No, I
They couldn't vote. There's still a lot of anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah, no, I would at this point in history, like for sort of the only places in the world where uh Jews were considered emancipated, having full political rights, were France, and there's a price there. And to a certain extent the United States, because they had federally, yes, states, just it took a little while for all the states, and then locally not completely. It wasn't like every locality in the United States wasn't until like post Civil War, but it was most of the United States. But nowhere else in the world. England was, I would say, better than a lot of other places, but it's sort of the way societies were built before the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment sort of really changed that, and I think we forget what because we're so used to the way things are in the United States, and how we were sort of set up, even if we didn't fulfill right away sort of the promises of what we're supposed to be, we at least had the sort of direction of where we were going. But that sort of was atypical. That's pretty atypical throughout sort of history, and even deciding who is of what country and who is not of what country. I think that's something that we forget, that what things look like right now are really like just sort of a blip in history, or a new era, if you're going to be optimistic. But it very recently things were just sort of not like that. I mean, and I like this particular community one because everything's set here in Hisrom, and this is fun history in general. But it's interesting because it's a small one. the United States at this time was an even smaller Jewish community. It was, I think, like 0.10% of the US's population and about a quarter of a percent of the world Jewish population. England was more like 1 or 2% of the world's Jewish population at that time. So it wasn't like this like significant big, it was a rising community, but it wasn't like the big sort of heavy hitter community that you sort of think of, that we would think of like at the time, like Amsterdam and still Salonika and even Livorno in Italy.
And I think again in bringing a lot of these stories to light, because there's other authors that are focused on other areas where here are romances with people of color, here are other different gay stories. I mean, all of these were existing at these different times, and as much fun as there is in reading your novel, frankly, I'm also learning things as I'm going through it. And it's the extra addition of reading it on my Kindle where I'm like, okay, I kind of know what this word is, but now I'm actually looking them up. But other elements there that are tied in, which you would normally hear or see with the Regency, where you have people trying to get ahead or better their station. In this, it's not because of necessarily the ton, but rather the different divisions that are already in the Jewish community, and the differences between okay, I'm going to get the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim. Okay,
So
I
the
probably
Sephardi, yeah, the
complete.
Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews, and there was definitely the Sephardi Jews had been in England at this point longer. I mean, it's always weird because you're like, well, there was a community before, but they got kicked out. But for the post restoration of William and Mary, you've got the Sephardi Jews mostly from the Netherlands who were welcomed in first. They were the more established. They were the more assimilated. And then you would end up with this influx from the Jews from the Germanic states at the time for a variety of reasons, and they were less assimilated and considered sort of less sophisticated. They weren't as wealthy because again, it was a rights thing. The German states were complicated on it's a long story to explain how they did it, but it wasn't as good as the Netherlands. Let's just say that. So there was sort of that sort of tension, and everybody was sort of jockeying for positions within the community, but also with outside the community. I mean, there's some definite parallels between the community and the town itself, because in every community, everybody is always sort of competitive with each other, and who is at the top and who is at the bottom. And it generally, if you've been there longer, you know more people, and it helps. And those sorts of things are sort of almost universal, but it's fun to sort of play with it in a different context than the town, and also seeing these sort of parallel structures at the same time in the same city.
And to bring it back a little bit to the lighter element, what was it, or was this a conscious decision as you were going through the writing and the editing of having that balance of here is I don't want to say a little bit educational as far as the Jewish community in the story, and making sure you're representing that community well, and tying that to here are the other fun bits from a fairy tale? Or was it all pretty much a natural flow, or did you have to go back and forth? Okay, here's the section that I need to tweak a little bit more, and this needs to be balanced with this element, but this is important. It might be darker, but I have to keep this in here to accurately show what was going on.
Um, I think the darker parts were guided by what characters I picked. I think and I always say, because Midnight, the first book in the series, is not as dark. It's a less dark fairy tale. Isabel's like ridiculously wealthy, and that helps a lot. And that helps things a lot in life. It was easy, like this book, because, and I had wanted to play with this for like the longest time. That I essentially I played with both the representation in Oliver Twist and the Grand Sophie, and I had to do that I had to do that part of the world justice, in that, especially because in both of those works, it a much more nuanced picture of that part of London and the type of people who occupy it and the type of choices that they have to make. And to be able to do that, I felt like I had to realistically show what it would be like. And especially because Hannah's a woman, not a man, because we have like a lot of historical romances where there are a ton of bad boy former criminal like heroes in those, but it's a whole different thing to be in those worlds if you're a woman too. Not only being a Jew, but also being a woman is just a whole other layer. It's in this, they have to make compromises and sacrifices that the guys don't have to make, period.
Well, Felicia, I want to switch over to what we call our fresh fiction facts. These are a series of quick questions meant to come up with answers off the top of your head. Sometimes we stump people, but we try to get a variety of things in there. Okay. And we're going to start off with, I always think it's an easy one, but usually doesn't turn out that way. Who would you most want to be stuck in an elevator with?
I would most want to be, and I'm like going really slowly so I can figure this out. It's hard because I'm really embarrassed. It turns out I'm really embarrassed in front of famous people. Um, but so I would probably freeze on anybody famous. So I have to say my mom, because I think my mom is nice and level-headed and could get us out of the elevator quicker than anybody I know.
Okay, that's a good one. And you'd be surprised sometimes it's not the goal of people to get out of the elevator quickly. And it's like, I don't know if I'm in a stuck elevator. I want to get out. Forget this stuff. How do you celebrate a new release?
So, I've gone to my day job for the last couple of new releases, but my sister always sends me flowers, and then we go out to dinner, my husband and my kids and I, in the evening. But yeah, because I've always if people tell me if you sit at home that you might like be like obsessing. So I kept busy.
What is your favorite writing fuel?
I'm a coffee person. I do a lot of coffee. Black.
Not on that caffeine. What is one thing that can instantly pull you out of a story, either a movie or a book? Just that thing that just ruins the mood for you.
I think what ruins the mood for me is if a character says something completely inconsistent with their characterization, either using language they don't seem they would have used, or just having a reaction that seems completely out of character. Then I'm like, what?
What is your favorite errand on a day off?
I would say I like grocery store. I usually can get one of my kids to come with me, and it's always fun to sort of see what they are really interested in for the week.
What is the most terrible movie that you legitimately enjoy?
The most terrible movie I legitimately enjoy is it's one of the ones that my kids really like, all three Pitch Perfect movies, and I like that they enjoy them so much that I've definitely watched them happily a bunch of times. And one is not bad. They do get progressively worse.
Now, the question is, do you sing along with them because you've seen them so many times now?
I'm not allowed. My kids don't let us sing. They're mean.
That's just not fair. No.
They're very, very mean.
Okay, other than books, What is something that you own a ridiculous amount of?
Dresses. I like
Oh,
dresses. And I luckily have not like grown for a really, really long time. So I can still wear stuff from like high schoolish. And some of it's coming back.
yes. Yeah, sometimes those trends that come back get kind of scary. I'm like, oh no, I remember some of these things. And
Yes, it's not always the
it's like,
same,
oh
but
no, tragic. Okay, now do you have a particularly favorite dress that you love, everyone else is like, okay, no, it's time for that one to go?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I think I have a backless one from college that I don't think I can pull off anymore. I that you really needed one of those sort of tapey bras for that I'm like, I'm too old for this, I think. It's like a dark brown, it's like a chocolate brown, and it's silk, and I really love it with like a counter, but it's backless, and I'm like, I think I turned 40. I think it might be time.
What? Okay, you've been kidnapped, but they return you after 2 hours because you will not stop talking about what?
Musical theater.
Ooh, okay. Now that is an endless source of conversation.
That is. And there are references in the books. There are definite references in the book.
Are you more of like a local musical theater fan or Broadway all the way?
Um, I can do both. I mean, I was lucky enough, I grew up not that far from New York City, so we would go sometimes. So I was pretty lucky. But now because I live in Cleveland, we're a little bit far. Though we do get the A touring cast that play House Square.
Okay. What luxury item can you not live without?
Um, we're fancy soap people. We like really fancy soaps. We don't do like regular the bar soaps. Even the bar soaps, like the most we'll do is we'll go to TJ Maxx and get the still slightly expensive bar soaps, nicer bar soaps there. We don't do regular bar soaps. We really like soap. Both
Now,
my
do you also
husband and
then
I.
have like the molded where they're all in different shapes? And do you actually use those?
We use them. Like my husband and I, we use the nice soaps. And if
Wow.
I'm really fancy, there's a couple there. So I use Floris's when they've been around since the Regency's perfume for my perfume. If I'm like a really special, I'll get some of their soaps. And there's also even older out of Italy, Santa Maria Novella, who they've been making soaps for about 800 years, and they're ridiculously expensive, but they're very pretty and very nice.
We had the different stages of soap growing up. I mean, there were some where they were more expensive and they smelled really nice and we could sometimes use those, but then we also had like the shapes and we were not allowed to use those except every once in a while they like get run under the water to like clean off the dust. That's how bad we,
Yes.
because if we used them, then you lost
You lost
the
the
shape
shape
and
and they got
figure.
into like a little, yeah, we had some from Provence. There were different shapes. So we still use them because they're good soap.
I love that. Okay. Okay. The Mount Rushmore of writing. Who are your four authors that need to go up there? Be it either because you most enjoy them or they're the most inspirational to you, whatever the criteria.
Okay. So I would say, okay, let's do the most inspirational. Most inspirational, Susan Isaacs, Beverly Jenkins, Elizabeth Hoyt, and Nora Ephron.
I am not going to dispute a single one of those. That would be an awesome group. Yes. Okay. What is your most dog eared or reread book?
Um, After All These Years by Susan Isaac, I have my high school's copy of that because I read it so many times they gave it to me because I basically destroyed it because at like 14, like 40 something 48-year-old divorcee accused of murdering her husband. That's what I relate to. But read that I read that so many times.
Is there an author where you just have to read all of their books? I mean, go back to their entire backlist as soon as they come out. It's like, oh, I need to get that next one.
There are a lot of people I will read like everything they write. I mean, I think I have to like go in shifts of people because like if I get on a kick of somebody, I will read almost everything. And it's a range of stuff. It depends on what I'm on the mood. It's not only his drama or like I read a lot of I read all the Jane Ann Krantz Arcane Society books in all the different time periods. I had to do that. Right, like it's just if I'm on a kick for it, it's what I will read.
Oh yes, I'm pretty much the same way, and you got to sometimes go back and reread the series so that everything's fresh for you again as
Yes.
new things come out. So yes. Would you rather go back in time and meet your ancestors or go forward and meet your descendants?
Oh, that's so hard. That's so hard. Oh God. I guess I'm future looking enough to the descendants, but oh God, I'm curious the other way too.
So you just need a time machine that you can go either direction.
Yes. Oh yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Most important questions are coming up next. And with that, our readers always want to know, what can we expect next and when? You've already alluded to the next couple books in this series with the Beauty and the Beast and then Sleeping Beauty. When should we be on the lookout?
25 and 26. I don't have dates for either of them, but Beauty and the Beast, which is Rebecca and Roger's book, is 2025. And then Nobody Has Met Anybody, who will be in book 4 because nobody shows up till book 3 for that, is 2026.
And with all of that, where is the best place for our readers and listeners to keep in touch with you and find out what's going on in your life?
Definitely my website, Felicia Grossman author.com. I also have a newsletter. I try to make it fun and only like once a month. So I'm not, unless there's something big, so I'm not nagging you, and not too rambly, but yes, I do newsletter, website. I'm decent at updating it. And on social media, I'm a little on Facebook. I'm definitely still on Instagram. I played with TikTok, but I wouldn't count on TikTok. I'm getting better at using. It's all of this is hard. I got so excited when I figured out how to do links and stories on Instagram. That was really, really exciting for me.
Well, with all of that, Felicia, thanks so much for joining our podcast tonight in Video Book Club. But stick around for some additional questions from our readers.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This is the best.